So now we're going to look at the Tudors, the Stuarts, and why it was a time of immense religious tension. The context of this time period is that the church had always been massively powerful prior to the Tudors. For hundreds of years, following anything other than the official teachings of the Roman Catholic Church was seen as heresy, heresy meaning a crime against religion. On the one hand, the church had introduced the idea of leniency to punishments, trying to give some criminals the opportunity to repent and rehabilitate. However, on the other hand, heretics had been dealt with harshly and severely by the church through torture and execution and being burned at the stake and things like that. The church had actively hunted and killed people over heresy. This religious tension had a huge impact on law and order and would continue to do so until the Industrial Revolution began. During the time period of the Tudors and the Stuarts, society had become divided by religion, neighbours didn't trust each other, and paranoia had become pervasive. It had infiltrated all of society. So why? Well, the Tudors come to power in 1485 under the reign of Henry VII. He is succeeded by his son, Henry VIII, who was born a Catholic. However, in 1533, he breaks away from the Roman Catholic Church for a number of reasons that you studied in Year 8. This is known as the English Reformation. He makes himself Protestant head of the Church of England. The head of state and the head of the church are now one person. So any crime against the monarch is also a crime against God. Heresy and treason are now combined. In addition to that, you've also got the fact that the Tudors took power by force in 1485, so they're already paranoid about anything that they can't control anyway. This continues with Edward VI, who's in power from 1547 to 1553. He made several changes to the church, rips out Catholicism as he had been raised a Protestant. However, Edward VI dies relatively early, aged around 15 years old in 1553, and he is succeeded by his sister, Mary I, who is Catholic. So what does she do? She changes the church back to Catholic, restores the authority of the Pope in England, and publicly burns around 300 Protestants for the crime of heresy. The purpose of this was to create a deterrent, as in try and instill fear into the population and scare them into being Catholic. This, however, also creates martyrs, people who are willing to die for their beliefs, and therefore galvanizes or increases Protestant opposition, because nothing increases support for a movement quite like dying for it. She's then succeeded by her sister in 1558, Elizabeth I, who changes the country back to Protestant, removes the influence of the Pope, and makes herself Supreme Governor of the Church of England. Once again, the head of the country is also the head of the church. Tension by this point is through the roof. However, during her reign, Elizabeth tried to manage this through the use of the middle way, basically asking people to comply in public and do what she asks in public. However, she's not trying to change people's internal faiths. And basically, if you want to stay Catholic, you can, but don't do it in public. Don't discuss it. Don't tell people. Pretend you're Protestant in public. In 1587, Elizabeth I orders the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, due to her being part of the Babington plot and a rival to her throne. The Tudors still see enemies everywhere, and therefore any sign of resistance, rebellion, or treason will be punished harshly. Mary, Queen of Scots, by the way, being a Catholic former Queen of Scotland, and therefore her presence in England was a threat to Elizabeth, and that's why she's killed in 1587. And that is the end of the Tudor monarchs in 1603. However, a lot of the beliefs and tension and all these things overspill into the Tudor period. So a lot of the things from these time periods are linked and kind of build on each other. So James I becomes the first Stuart monarch in 1603. He's a Protestant and a huge believer in divine right, the belief that kings were chosen by God. He even wrote a book about witches called Demonology, detailing how to catch them, and he also reintroduces the swimming test as a method to catch witches, which was based on an old Anglo-Saxon trial by ordeal. This building tension ever since the beginning of the Tudor period, these tensions culminate with the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. Guy Fawkes, Robert Catesby, and others were responding to persecution towards Catholics and therefore attempted to blow up James I, the Protestant monarch. They believed James was a heretic. They were caught at the very, very last second, and how did James punish them? Well, through brutal punishment of hanging, drawing, and quartering. The reason why they were punished so harshly is because of the paranoia. Ever since the Tudors took over, they've been looking for enemies everywhere, and that belief has spilled into the Stuart period as they were related to the Tudors. It also challenged key beliefs of the period, heresy, treason, and the challenge to the hierarchy you've tried to take on the king. James I dies in 1625 and is replaced by his son, Charles I, who rules from 1625 to 1649. He marries a Catholic, as he's a Protestant, by the way, Charles I, but his reign gets off to a bad start when he immediately marries a Catholic in 1625. He also makes several changes to the church services, and people suspect him of being a secret Catholic. Those changes to the church service I mentioned, such as introducing a new prayer book in Scotland. Events of his reign lead to the English Civil War, and he is eventually executed after being defeated by Parliament in 1649. The execution of Charles I leads to a reduction in the belief in divine right, and that means once he is killed and there's not, lightning bolts and famine and all these things sent from God, people start to question religion, and what we see is the authority of the church weakening over society gradually. There's also a wider context to this. You've also got enlightenment and scientific discovery sweeping across Europe. So after following the death of Charles I, you'll see a gradual decline in the influence of the church.